Wonderful. So I'm, like I said a second ago, just before I started the session, I'm really excited actually about today's topic. This has been sort of a hot topic over the last little bit, and it was clearly well received by anybody on our contact list, as we've got quite a few folks registered to join us today. And I was references this week and a couple weeks ago, and this was a very popular topic of conversation. So I feel like it's a timely chat. We are experiencing more and more clients trying to navigate what this looks like, right? As we go back to work, whether that's hybrid, well, most of us are sort of in that, still sort of in a hybrid situation, and we're trying to figure out what the sort of future of work looks like. And so for a lot of our clients, that is leading or seeming to be leading or looking like it's going to be some sort of hoteling or hybrid between work and home. And if it is a hybrid or a hoteling station, the sort of conversation, the next part of the conversation is, okay, we've got sorted out what we want to do, but what is this going to look like? How do we tackle this in a comprehensive way? And most importantly, addressing the ergonomics, or sort of heading off at the pass any potential ergonomic setup concerns. So that's the sort of goal for our chat today, is to really review the considerations that we should be making as we start to move into a hoteling or a shared workstation situation. People are sort of handling this differently, but I'm going to say that the concepts that I'm going to talk about apply to whether you have like a workstation split between two people, so it's sort of dedicated or semi-dedicated, or if it's more of a booked workstation like a hoteling workstation, and anybody might work there. So that's what we're sort of going to cover off today. And like I said, I'm really excited about this topic. I feel like it's very, very timely. I should do some housekeeping items. I've already had the question, will the slides be provided? We don't send out the PowerPoint, but we do record our session today. So the recording has been started. I will share this on YouTube and then send a link out to everyone later today. So that will be available to you if you want to review it yourself, or perhaps if you want to share it with a colleague who might also benefit from listening in on their conversation today. Anybody has a question throughout the webinar, I do have the chat bar open, and so I would encourage you to type your question into the chat bar. That's the easiest way to get a hold of me while we're chatting today. And then I will either respond to that message in the moment, if that makes sense. Sometimes I'll put a pin in something if I'm in the middle of it, or if I'm going to answer that question on the next slide or the slide after. But I will try and sort of note that I've received all those questions as we go along. And there also should be some time at the end for questions as well. All right, so without further ado, let's hop into this chat. What are we doing with hotel workstations? What does this look like? We've seen some good, some bad, and some, I'm going to say ugly. I don't know if that's true definition, but some good and some bad versions of this so far. And we want to chat about what we're seeing and what sort of best practices might be moving forwards for you all. So my plan for today is to cover this off in sort of 4 buckets or general sort of headings. I want to talk very briefly in general about hybrid work, and sort of dive into the hoteling concept as part of that overview. And then I'm really going to spend the bulk of my time on sort of the next 3 pieces, is making sure that, excuse me one sec, I just got to let some folks in. And spend the bulk of our time on that next section, the equipment considerations. I want to talk about workplace accommodations, which is sort of a secondary step as we start to talk about hoteling stations, but how do we address the accommodations that maybe we already have in place for folks with their office setup that might be a bit more challenging, or there are some new challenges presented when we go to a shared workstation. And then I'm going to wrap up today by talking about training, because I think that's an important piece as always, and one that has been, I would say, with the folks we've been working with, is one that's still being a little bit overlooked, right? We're not quite there, and that's fine. You may not be there yet, but that at some point we need to get there. So I want to talk about training as well to wrap up today. So let's start with this conversation of hybrid work. I think most of us probably understand this, but I just want to make sure we're all on the same page, right? We've seen a lot of transition to hybrid work. Folks have been working at home for the last several years, whether that was part-time or full-time. We've seen a lot of work from home happening. And as workplaces have reopened, a lot of work sites we're connecting with have got some different approaches to this, but are sort of looking into or considering continuing, at least part-time, this hybrid work. So they may have some days dedicated where you have to be in the office. They may say, okay, you need to be in the office 5 days out of 10. And other places are opening it up very, very broadly and saying, okay, you need to apply for hybrid work. And what does that, what would you like, right? Do you want to be on site every day? Do you want to be on site only once a week? Do you want to be on site once a month, right? And they've been much more broad with what that looks like, and we'll consider those requests on a case-by-case basis. So every client we're working with is in a different space as to what they're going to accept or move forwards with here. But in many cases, the hybrid work, if somebody is coming into the office, is looking more and more like hoteling. They won't have a dedicated workstation at work. They are going to have a shared space that they can book, and that's going to be their space when they are physically on site. So we know that there are pros and cons to hybrid work. I'm sure you've all been living this, and we're going to dive into what the pros and cons are for hoteling work as well. But certainly the sort of some of the pros we've seen are that there is some reduced operating costs, especially if we transition to hoteling. You don't need as much physical space. You have 100 employees at your workplace in the office, but only, at any given time, only maybe 40 or 50 are going to be on site, or perhaps even less. So there's no reason to have a 100-desk workspace when you really only have 40 or 50 people on site at a time. That can significantly lead to significant savings. This might be more true for people who rent spaces that are easily able to let those spaces go. We've seen that happening in like very like downtown core areas, like for us, downtown Toronto, for example. Built offices that once occupied 3 floors of a building are now occupying a single floor. And you imagine the cost savings of renting 3 floors downtown Toronto versus 1. That's a very significant cost savings for the client. So we understand that that's one of the benefits of this. From the employee side, there's a lot of potential productivity increases. I know sometimes I find that when I have less distractions at home, that I am able to maintain, the less distractions leads to better productivity. Work-life balance is good because I don't have to spend as much time in the vehicle commuting to and from. And it may also allow for some flexible work hours, which is, again, something that perhaps may or may not be included as part of your hybrid or hoteling work options. But we also know there are some cons, right? This isn't a perfect magic bullet. Not everybody loves this. Not every employer is finding success with this, and we get it, right? It can be difficult to supervise employees who are remote, right? So trying to retrain our supervisors to figure out what that's going to look like and how do we do that successfully is a challenge. Lack of communication, right? We don't see our staff on a regular basis. They also don't connect with each other to the same degree, right? Whereas I once might have sort of just spoken over my cubicle desk to my neighbor beside, I can no longer do that. Now it's happening virtually, probably through Teams or other messaging systems. So we lose some of that more personal connection with other folks, which can be a challenge. I think security of working from home has become less of an issue as organizations have gotten better at this over the last couple of years, but that still could be potential concerns there. But then it also reduced sense of attachment to the organization, to our colleagues, right? That can lead to some culture shifts that maybe are less than ideal. So there's a lot of pros and cons here, but I think most of us are sort of fitting into, our employees are asking for this. They're looking for more hybrid or remote work options. And so we're, heading down that path at this point. And like I said, for a lot of you, that means hoteling. So what I wanted to just do quickly is just define what I mean by hoteling to make sure that we're all on the same page. There are a couple different terms here. Hoteling and hot desking are sort of two of the terms. Sometimes we use them interchangeably, but they aren't really the same. So when we talk about hoteling, what we're really looking at is, I think where most of our clients, I don't meet many clients doing hot desking. Hoteling seems to be where it's at. And this is where we have office space available. We have desks available to employees, and they are able to book those spaces, right? So I'm going into the office today, and I know I'm, booked into room 102, and my desk is going to be number C, right? Or letter C or letter 12 or number 12 or whatever, right? So I have pre-booked a space that's available in order to use that when I get on site. So I know what space I'm going to be at. I know where that's going to be. I know there's going to be a desk available to me when I get on site. And then I may have also planned my day so that I've booked a meeting room or another co-working space that might also be available, right? Because I know that in the afternoon, I have a meeting with 4 people. I'm going to need a space for that. And so that's usually where our clients are at, is that booking element. They're able to book in spaces. But There is also hot desking, which is more where it's sort of a bit of more of a free-for-all, right? That I arrive on site, I plan to be on here on Tuesday, and I can choose any desk that's available. And so what I'm talking about here primarily is hoteling, because I think there are some, I would encourage you to move towards hoteling, because I think there are some benefits to this on many levels. The ability to book your preferred space is not to be understated. There's lots of reasons why people prefer certain spaces over others. And so having people sort of compete to get in as early as possible to grab their favorite space that makes them the most comfortable or places them in the right space or connects, puts them beside their colleague who they're going to need to converse with intermittently throughout the day. There's benefits to that I think we lose out on when we go with a hot desking option. So I would say definitely looking at hoteling over hot desking would be my recommendation. And I'll highlight some other examples of where I think that will be helpful as we move forwards. So when we talk about sort of moving into my goal for the next section, starting to talk about equipment considerations, I just want to highlight what we're aiming for, right? This is sort of the key or most important part of any computer workstation, and it doesn't go away just because we don't have a dedicated workspace, right? So we're really looking for good posture at the computer, right? That's sort of the overarching goal of all office ergonomics is good posture or good fit. And so what that typically looks like is sort of what you see in images up there on the screen. I'm not going to spend tons of time on, what is good posture today, because that's not really the focus. But I just wanted to highlight the fact that that is really the sort of the underpinning of everything that we're doing when we're talking about hoteling is trying to create a workspace that anyone can book and sit down at and achieve these postures. Right? They need to be able to sit down. They need to be able to type and mouse at elbow height. Their neck needs to be straight. Their shoulders need to be relaxed. Their wrists should be straight. Their feet need to be supported, right? If they're going to sit, they need some specific sort of ranges in their hips and their knees. But that's ultimately what everything we're doing when we're recommending equipment and adjustability in our hoteling workstations. This is all sort of the driving factor behind all of that, is trying to achieve good posture. Now, I already let the cat out of the bag a little bit, but really the way we achieve good posture, one of our biggest challenges in a hoteling workstation is that it's not meant for me, right? It's not meant for me specifically. When I talk about, like, when I go do an office assessment for someone who is dedicated to a desk, like my personal desk right here, this is built for me, right? I have selected exactly the right working height. I've got a chair that fits me. I've got the monitor, webcam, etc. that I prefer. I've got everything set up so that it properly fits me. Challenge with hoteling workstations is that I don't know who's going to sit there, right? I have no idea as the employer which one of my employees is going to drop into that workstation and sit down, but we still need to figure out ways to fit the worker, every worker that might come in and sit down there. We have to fit the worker fit the work to the worker. We need to fit the workstation to the individual that's going to sit there. And so usually what that means in a hoteling workstation setup is that we need to look at adjustability in our workstation. Adjustability can mean different things. That doesn't always sort of achieve it. We don't always achieve that same goal in the same way. But essentially, we're looking for building in adjustability or ranges of movement in our equipment so that any staff member or most staff members can sit down at that workstation, raise and lower their monitor, raise and lower their keyboard, adjust their chair so that it properly fits them while they are seated. Because that's obviously how we achieve, or hopefully it's obvious, how we achieve good neutral postures at the computer workstation. So everything we're going to talk about today is how do we create the right range of adjustability so that staff can be comfortable while they are seated at their computer. So I think as we talk about all the equipment, really what this is going to be about is determining what we purchase, right? What equipment are we purchasing? What standards are we setting in place so that when we go out to purchase a sit-stand desk or a keyboard tray or a computer chair, what standards do we need in place in terms of adjustability ranges, in terms of height, in terms of reach? There's all kinds of different factors. But really what we're trying to do is create good purchasing standards so that when we go to buy equipment for these shared workstations, they will fit as much of the population as possible. Now, recognizing that there still may be some folks at the extremes, right? Like I was just talking to someone yesterday, one of our municipal clients, and they do some in-house ergonomics, and she was just talking about how she just recently has done some assessments for a guy who was 6'5" and another male who was 6'7", and she was talking about how hard they were to accommodate because they are so tall and outside of standard. There will always be a few people at the either extreme low end or the extreme high end of those ranges. They probably don't fit in your standard setup, but ideally your purchasing standard will create adjustability ranges that will accommodate, 95+% of your population. The bigger you can go, the more people will be comfortable at these workstations. And then we may need to figure out some specialty things for our particularly tall or our particularly short individuals, right? They may be outside the sort of standard. And we're just, ultimately, what I'm saying is it'd be very difficult to design for 100% of the population. We want to get as close as possible so as many people can be properly fit as possible. Okay, so that's really what we're working towards, is sort of looking at what are we purchasing and how does it fit the ranges of staff that we have present at our work. All right, so sort of moving out of part one here, I want to dive into those equipment considerations. So when we're purchasing equipment, when we're looking at selecting equipment, what are our options? What ranges should we be looking at? What adjustability would be the best in order to properly accommodate a wide range of folks? So I'm going to start with the chair. This one was probably the most challenging because there's actually a million. I say a million. That's an exaggeration. There's not a million, but there's lots of adjustability ranges to consider here. So what I wanted to highlight is some features that we would some features, and then two, talk about range of movement for those features. So there are different features present on every chair. There are some ones that we see and we consider to be fairly standard in terms of normal features we would see on almost all chairs. And then there are some that are in addition to or optional features that would be nice and might help create additional fit, but aren't necessarily essential. So when we're talking about adjustability in a chair, the very basic is that the chair seat height needs to go up and down. We need to be able to accommodate people with a wide range of heights, right? So your chair needs to be able to go up and down. An optional feature might be that the depth of the seat increases or decreases to accommodate shorter folks need a shorter seat pan. Taller folks need a taller or longer seat pan to accommodate a longer leg length. We need to have some adjustability in lumbar support, height, and depth. Now, I say that we are seeing some more chairs that I would describe as having an intuitive backrest. That's sort of the term that seems to be being used more frequently, meaning that the backrest sort of moves and shapes to your spine as you move in the chair. So it's intuitive, it flexes with you. And so that might be an option as well in terms of limiting how much adjustability is in a chair, but at the same time providing some pretty decent support for your low back. So it doesn't always have to be adjustable as long as it's designed to move with the employee. Armrest height would be a very standard. We need to make sure that our armrests can go up and down so they properly fit the employee. We might also have armrest width. You might also have seat pan tilt. That would be another option, not very commonly adjusted, but it is another option available in your chair. So those are some of the most common adjustability features. I think hopefully it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyways, is that the more adjustability features you have in a chair, the more likely you are to be able to achieve fit, right? So that's a great thing. The flip side of that statement is that the more adjustability features we have in a chair, sometimes the more complicated it can be to achieve fit. And so sometimes what we see is that our employees have a fabulous chair, but they aren't totally sure how to use all of the features. And so they aren't necessarily achieving good fit, not because the chair doesn't do it, but because they aren't sure how to make it work. And so that can be one of the challenges about you want sort of adjustability, but just know that sometimes that goes hand in hand with some confusion or difficulty with achieving good adjustments in the chair, good fit, right? Because they're not able to get it correct. So I'll talk about how we can tackle that when we get down to the last section, when we talk about some training. I still think adjustability is important, but I just want to highlight that there often is sort of two sides to that coin. Good adjustability means good fit potential, but it can also make it more difficult to achieve that fit. So it's sort of a two-sided coin here. I didn't get into, although I do on the future slides with some of the other elements, I didn't get into range of movements here. So I didn't get into what would be the ideal seat height range and the ideal armrest height range, because for a chair, this is very complicated. There are lots of different adjustable ranges. I could have given you 5 to 10 slides on what height range a seat height should be to accommodate small females to tall males. I could have done the same for armrests. I could have done the same for backrest height and angles. I could have gone through lots of things. And so it would have become a very convoluted conversation. But ultimately, we're looking for the biggest ranges, right? The bigger the range that a chair has in terms of seat height, the more people it will accommodate. So when you're looking at 2 or 3 different chair options, trying to figure out which one's going to work best in your hoteling workstation, I would want you or suggest that you compare the ranges that are present for each individual factor. If you can get some demos in and have some small folks sitting in them and some tall folks and try and see how that fits, whether they can adjust it to their stature, those are all good opportunities to just sort of evaluate that and which one is going to give you the best range and therefore the most likely to fit the most number of employees. Okay, so range of movement of each of those features is important. The other thing to consider is that not everyone fits a standard size chair. So a lot of people fit a standard size chair. I would say, I don't know the exact percentage, and it probably depends on the chair itself and what the adjustment ranges are. But a very significant number of people I do office assessments for would fit in a standard chair. However, every once in a while, I meet a smaller female or a taller male that a standard chair isn't really the best option for them. And so in that case, you might also want to be considering, how do I incorporate maybe 1 or 2 petite options into my spaces? Maybe I need 1 large chair as well. And then figuring out how to create that, or like when you're talking about booking, this is one of the reasons I think hoteling is better than hot desking, right? Is if I can create a booking site where, I've got 12 different workstations to book out. One has a petite chair and maybe has a lower range of adjustments in my desk. One has a tall chair. I probably don't need a higher range of adjustments because most desks go quite high, but let's say it has a higher range of adjustments. And then there's 10 that are sort of average height, designed for sort of standard, quite a, 5'2" or 5'3" to like 6'1" people. Then I have 10 of those desks. But if I have a way of creating the bookings so that I can designate that this is for, this is a petite chair, this is a petite desk, it's meant for shorter height individuals, maybe I can create a space where I've got 1 small, 1 tall, and a bunch of standard. And then when somebody who is smaller needs to come into the office, they know that they're looking for workstation 2, because workstation 2 is where they will find the equipment that is best suited to their stature. So that's where hoteling, I think, wins out for me over hot desking, is that it gives you the ability to create some differences among the workstations that people can still book and plan to sit at, knowing that it's most likely to fit them. Okay? So those can be options as well. The next piece I want to talk about is working height. So the goal of workstation, if you remember my little picture where all the people were sitting and standing and I had all these criteria as to what good posture looks like, ultimately what we're looking for, aiming for at a computer workstation, is you want to type and mouse at elbow height. That's sort of, that's the holy grail, I would say, of computer workstation setup. If somebody can type and mouse at elbow height, it means improved shoulder postures, upper limb, neck, upper back, all the way down to your wrists. Sort of everything from the shoulder or the wrist arm up essentially tends to look better in terms of posture when we type and mouse at elbow height. And so what that looks like, I said I'd give you some ranges on the future slides because these ones are a little bit more narrow in terms of scope, is what that looks like for most folks if you are seated. If somebody's feet are on the floor, right? That's another key criteria. If somebody's feet are on the floor, then for a small female, right, this is someone who's maybe 5 feet, maybe even a little bit under 5 feet tall. They might need a desk as low as approximately 24 inches, assuming 23.5 is their elbow height, plus the height of a keyboard, which is, half an inch to an inch. So probably a desk height of about 24 inches would make sense for them, as low as 24 inches. And that's very short, right? Most standard workstations are 29.5-ish inches high, give or take a half inch. And so what that means is that's 4 or 5 inches below what a standard desk height looks like. So we need to find a desk or a way to lower this individual down to somewhere closer to 24 inches to create good setup. On the flip side, a tall male needs something that's a lot higher than that. So these are your taller males, sort of outside of that 6 feet-ish range. Again, it depends a little bit on the measurement. Essentially sort of 6'1", probably 6'2", 3, 4, sort of up in that range. They might have an elbow height of upwards of almost 33 inches. And so we need a desk that ideally goes between like 24 and 33 inches to properly accommodate everyone in a seated workstation. So that's quite a range, right? That is way below our our typical seated desk height. And then it also needs to go up a little higher than desk height for some folks as well. If we add in standing considerations, because some of you are considering standing workstations as part of your hoteling option, and that's a great way to sort of create adjustability, but you then obviously need to consider your standing ranges as well. So we want, ideally, in a perfect world, we'd love a desk that goes down as low as about 24 inches to accommodate our small females while they're seated, and upwards of about 48, 49 inches to accommodate our tall males when they're standing. And that means everybody else in between will be able to raise or lower the desk to their sort of preferred height. So they can set it up at elbow height, no matter what their height is between small female and tall male. Now, there are different ways of achieving this, right? So some of our clients are saying, okay, the simplest way, we want to sort of move forwards, sit-stand desks are where we're going with this, and that's great. So you can get down to a fully height adjustable desk as long as it goes through quite this range of motion. But we can also look at different ways to tackle the problem. So for example, let's see if I can get my slide moving here. For example, a keyboard tray mounted to a desk that's 29 inches high, let's say, can allow for a significant range of adjustability with the selection of the right keyboard tray. So again, we're trying to achieve a range of motion here. So we want the keyboard tray to go below the desk by ideally upwards of about 5 or 6 inches, maybe even a little more if we can get that. We tend to be limited. I think the lowest keyboard tray I can think of off the top of my head is about 7 inches below the desk. And then in an ideal world, that keyboard tray would also have range to go up above the desk, right? Would be able to go up above the desk by 3 or 4 inches as well. Now that's quite a significant range of motion for a keyboard tray. And there will be lots and lots of models out on the market that do not fit that bill, right? Do not have that kind of range of motion. So you need to do your research to figure out which ones might achieve that goal, which ones are going to go low enough and high enough to accommodate our staff, both seated and standing. Some of our clients are considering what I would describe as a desk add-on, right? They're going to use their existing fixed height desks and say, okay, but we do want to build in sit stand. And so in this case, we're going to add a unit to the top of our desk, and that's going to allow us to go from seated to standing. That would also work as a great way to create a range of motion, allow for some flexibility and movement throughout the day, just healthy living things. However, we need to be cautious here again. There's a lot of desk add-on units that just sit on top of the desk and never go lower than desk height. And so for your small females, that's going to be really difficult. They might need a desk height of maybe 24, 25 inches, but the keyboard platform doesn't go below the desk. Well, that puts it at about 30 inches. That could be a difference of 5 or 6 inches, and is going, and that difference can't really be bridged by raising your chair sufficiently, for example. Now we're getting into other complications. So what we're really looking for here is, if we're going to go to some sort of add-on unit, is we want to find one that has a keyboard platform that goes below the desk height, right? Some of them will lower down so that the keyboard goes below the desk. And then we'll stand up so your keyboard will raise above the desk as well. And so that would be an option, but we still need to be considering our height ranges and our goals in terms of adjustability and looking for units that meet those goals. And then, oops, sorry, I'm going the wrong direction here on my slide. I pressed the wrong button. The other option would be to go to something fully height adjustable, right? So if we go to a fully height adjustable desk, that would solve all those issues, right? We can go down to whatever height we need lower range and up to whatever height we need upper range. Just again, be mindful of the specifications of the equipment that you're ordering. I've seen a lot of at-home workstations, primarily at home just lately, where somebody maybe has ordered a sit-stand desk, but it doesn't go below 29.5 inches or 30 inches. Well, that's not going to solve your issue. Right now, I have small females still trying to work at 30-inch height desks. That's not really going to serve any of our smaller females. So instead, we're looking for a range, again, a desk that will go down as low as 24 inches approximately and up as high as about 48, 49 inches, so that our tall males and our small females are going to be really well accommodated in the range of motion there. And I hope I would hope there are options for crank adjustable, which tend to be less expensive. I haven't seen that at a workplace in a long time, but I'm just going to say it out loud in case it needs saying. Crank adjustability is not the best choice, right? Crank adjustability is going to it's going to limit how often people are adjusting it. It's going to be difficult to adjust. We're definitely looking for something motored or powered here that is going to raise or lower sufficiently. Some of them also are like, you can sort of do it yourself. You can sort of squeeze a lever and raise or lower it. Sometimes those are incredibly heavy to do on your own, very awkward. So although it might be better than a crank, it might also be really limiting in what if some people maybe aren't able to adjust it well. So be cautious of those as well. I would say definitely, I would encourage you, if you're going this route, to really look into a good powered option that will go through that full range of motion. Next up, I want to talk about monitors. So again, reminding us we're looking back to our ideal ergonomic setup, or what good posture equals comfort. The goals for our monitor is that the top of the screen is even with our eye height, and it's about an arm's length away from our seated position. So wherever we sit, we should stick out our fingers and be able to touch the screen. So what that really means is that we need to have a monitor height range that, like the previous slide, that accommodates our smaller females to our taller males. If you're considering seated and standing, obviously it needs to go between both of those ranges. But essentially, this is the range, like eye height from seated to standing. But you would essentially look at this from desk height and up, right? It needs to go 69.3 inches. Well, we've got a desk height, a range of X. So you can do the math and figure out how high the monitor needs to be off the desk. It'll depend on what range you get in your desk in order to achieve that. Okay, so the top of the screen with your eye height at about an arm's length away. And so we've got some ranges there to look at. Now, again, different ways to achieve the end goal here, which is ultimately height adjustability, so everyone can properly accommodate to their computer workstation. So what we have seen some success with some pedestal monitor stands. So the monitor is mounted to this height adjustable pedestal. It goes up and down. If the range of movement through the pedestal is quite good, if the height range through there, you might be able to achieve the ideal setup with the pedestal itself. So you might say, oh, you know what? Pedestals are fine. We are height adjustable. When we put them on our desk, it comes up to 18 inches above the desk, which is going to properly accommodate most of our staff, and you can go through that math to figure that out. But ultimately, that pedestal can be adjustable enough that it can accommodate quite a significant percent of your population. You could also go to a monitor arm, and that could be a single or a dual monitor arm, depending on whether you have single or dual monitors at your workstation. And so you can play with that as well. Same idea here when we're looking at the nice thing about a monitor arm is usually that you get both height and depth adjustability. So the challenge with the pedestal is that if I want to move it closer, it can be a bit heavy and awkward to do that. A monitor arm that has sort of that double joint will allow you to slide it in and out, so you can move it closer or further, and usually you have up and down range there. So you've got quite a significant range of options in terms of how you position the screen from both a depth and a height perspective. So sometimes monitor arms allow for a little bit more flexibility there and can be a bit easier, like just making sure, if you're going to increase usage, right, somebody might not move their screen forwards if it's on a pedestal and kind of awkward. But if their monitor arm is easy to slide around and move, they might sit down at the workstation every day and take a half a second and adjust it into position. So sometimes I didn't actually put a slide in here about that, but the ease of adjustability will absolutely lead to increase of usage, right? People will use the features that are present at the workstation if they're easy to use. If they're harder to use, they're less likely to adhere to the setup guidelines because it's a pain to adjust. And so that sort of speaks to a powered height adjustability. They're going to use that more likely than something else. Monitor arm that's super easy to raise, lower, move in and out, most likely to use that to achieve good ergonomic setup, right? So those two factors play a role here. Excuse me, thank you. All right, so last one I want to talk about here is keyboard and mouse. So to achieve a good ergonomic setup, a keyboard and mouse is essential. So this is one that is important, and I'm highlighting it because I would describe this as we have seen some clients here saying, okay, just we've got desks set up, to bring your laptop, right? So we've got desks set up, and I've got just bring your laptop and drop it on the desk, and you can work from anywhere. Laptops have made our life incredibly portable. That's fantastic. That is true. However, we're never going to achieve good ergonomic setup when we're working exclusively on the laptop. So I would say any hoteling workstation should have a monitor, a keyboard, and mouse all present so that when somebody gets there with their laptop, because that's how they're going to arrive, they're going to plug their laptop into the workstation and ultimately have monitor height and keyboard and mouse all set up at the proper working height, or they have the opportunity to set up all of those things the proper working height. Dropping a laptop on a height adjustable workstation is great. It gives us height adjustability, but it's not going to allow for neutral shoulder, elbow, wrist, and neck postures because our laptop is never going to be ergonomic, right? So we need to make sure that we have some external pieces present. So I would say a keyboard and mouse is essential, and we want to set those up at elbow height, like I already mentioned. Keyboard and mouse on the same surface, that's going to create some straight wrist postures, right? And the height ranges will be on the previous slide when we talked about desk height, right? We talked about seated and standing height. One thing I wanted to note here is that we're seeing more and more as technology, this is something even I experienced recently, as technology advances in the workplace, we experience new challenges, right? And one of the new challenges that we've been seeing is that new computers have less and less USB ports. In fact, my brand new computer, and mine's a bit different. I'm working on a tablet computer at the moment. We're trying that out. My computer has zero USB ports. I don't have any. And so my new problem was that I got this new computer, was really excited, but I have to plug in a webcam, a mouse, and a monitor. And that's not possible because I don't have a USB. So what it means is that if you are going to go to hoteling workstations, what I've seen, the most successful option I've seen is having a docking station there that everything is plugged into already, and the employee comes in and attaches to the existing docking station, right? That can take getting all the technology to work nicely together when maybe have different variations of, you have different ages of laptops. Not everybody is sort of can be accommodated properly with the same docking station. I realize that there are some challenges there, but I would say that sort of moving towards that as a gold standard where it's as simple as walking in, putting your laptop on the desk and plugging in a USB-C cord or something to it to connect the docking station. It will start charging. It does all of it there, right? It'll charge. It'll have everything already connected to it. So your monitor, mouse, keyboard immediately connected to your laptop. All right. And so that I say is probably moving forwards the gold standard, although I recognize that different organizations are at different life cycles of computers and equipment, and this may not be as simple as I'm making it out to be. Hopefully I'm not making it out to be simple, because I've actually seen it be very challenging just lately, but that is sort of the gold standard moving forwards. This, again, adherence to equipment usage. The simpler we make it, the more likely our staff are going to use it. So if they get there and they have to attach 5 different things to their laptop, they are less likely to do all those attachments, more likely to just drop their laptop on the desk and go. And if it's as simple as plugging one cord in and then everything is connected and beautifully working, they are way more likely to make that happen. So if we're looking for adherence or usage of the beautiful new equipment we're providing at this hoteling station, make it as easy as humanly possible. All right, so I'm moving out of sort of standard recommendations for hoteling. If I've missed something or if you have a question about any of that standardized equipment that you want me to address, then I'm happy to cover that. So feel free to drop that question in the chat room. I did see one of our attendees respond to a question in the chat, so I appreciate you handling that for me. Thank you, Amy. As we move along to workplace accommodations as our next section, if you have a question about equipment, I'll hop back to that. Oh, okay, I got a question. I've had challenges with the range of height adjustment of monitor arms for sit stand, single surface desk. Okay. 9 inches of vertical adjustment didn't go high enough for tall people. Yes. Okay. So saying that monitor arms are great, but what if they don't go high enough? So the difference there is that you can push a pedestal, like a monitor on a standard pedestal, you can push that a little bit, right? You can find a monitor stand that's higher. So in some ways, it gives you a little bit more flexibility. And do I know off the top of my head what adjustable range of monitor arms we should be looking at to adjust to meet most workers' need? That's a great question, Lisa. And I actually don't know off the top of my head exactly what range that is, but I'm going to make a note and I'm going to send out the link to this recording later today. And I'll make a note to look up that range and I should be able to provide you with some good numbers and I can put that right in that email. So just give me a second to look that up because that's a great question. So I'll do some research and I'll get back to you because I should be able to do that math and figure out what range makes the most sense. And I agree, there are some monitor, definitely not all monitor arms are as adjustable as others. I saw one that was amazing the other day and I'm gonna have to look up which model it was, but it went so low that the monitor actually touched the desk, which is also incredibly unusual. And so it had quite a range of motion that I was very impressed with. And if I can remember which monitor arm that was, I wrote it down somewhere, then I will also share that with you, Lisa, after, because it had quite a range. All right, so I wanted to talk about workplace accommodations today, as well as the hoteling, because I think this is one of the hiccups people are going to experience, right? Is that they have some workplace accommodations maybe already in place forwards that somebody's struggling with discomfort, and we're going to create some accommodation. And ultimately, sort of the first statement I want to make is that our duty to accommodate doesn't go away just because somebody is working hybrid or working at a hoteling or shared workstation, right? It's still there. We still have to make sure that we're supporting people while they're at work. Not a surprise to any of you, I'm sure. But what it means is that it creates a layer of challenges, right? Because now I've set up this hoteling workstation. I have done all my due diligence. I've got an amazing range of motion. I've got an awesome chair. I've got a keyboard, mouse, monitor, all this great stuff that Jen said needs to be there. I have the Cadillac of hoteling workstations present. That's fantastic. But now I have an employee who needs a different kind of mouse, or who needs a split keyboard, or who needs 3 monitors instead of 2, or who knows what, right? There's lots of reasons why we make different adjustability options out there, or why we make different recommendations to accommodate different individuals. And so now I have a standardized workstation and this person needs specialty equipment. And those two things don't always go hand in hand. And so how do I make that work at these workstations? Because I still need to accommodate this person, but I don't have their specialty equipment at their workstation, nor do I not necessarily want to provide I don't want to put specialty equipment at every workstation because that doesn't really make sense, right? There are going to be a bunch of people that are going to sit down and go, I don't even know how to use this keyboard. So just saying, okay, well, I'll just give everybody this, this split keyboard that you see up there on the screen right now. That's not going to solve your problem either. And so we need to have a different ways of managing the accommodations that we have or that we will have in the future to ensure that they are properly supported at these hoteling stations as well. So I would say that there are some different options here. I actually was at a client very recently who is at the end stages of implementing some really beautiful hoteling stations. I was super impressed by the way that they have tackled it and what equipment they've been choosing. And this is a conversation we were having. They said, we're still working out the final details of this. But what they ended up with is actually that they're going to have the most commonly used equipment available to book out, just like they can book out a station, but it's going to be booked out from a shared locker. So they have like I don't even know how to describe it, but it's going to be a locker-based system. So there'll be a bank of lockers along one wall of the communal, they have 30 desks set up in a communal space. They're going to have a bank of lockers along there, and you would, if you need that split keyboard, it's in locker number 106, and so you will get a code to go in and access locker number 106, and that will allow you to book that equipment out just the same way that you would be booking out your workstations. You book out your workstation and you book out the equipment that you need. And so they are thinking that might have a couple of each piece of equipment so that if they have 2 folks that need accommodation that day, they can have both people can get access to the equipment. But it is an interesting approach to having specialty equipment available on site for staff, saying, you know what, these are the things, the top 20 things that we recommend for accommodation. So we're going to make those available. You can book that out. Here's how you go ahead and do that. And this is how you get access to it. And so I thought that was really interesting. There are going to be some hurdles, and we were chatting about what those are going to be. And that client said our biggest problem hurdle is that some of these specialty equipment have a USB, right? They have a little USB dongle thingy, right? Those, I don't even have one sitting here in front of me, but those little wee short guys that stick into your computer, it's going to go walking, right? Somebody's going to forget to put that back in the cupboard with everything else back in the locker when they're done. Next person's going to check it out, and that piece isn't going to be available. And they're like, you know what, that is the reality. That is going to happen. We'll have some trace back as to who is most likely to have that to follow up with, hopefully get it back. But we may also need to be prepared to replace this equipment on occasion when something like that happens. But their thought, and I thought this was a good point, is that this might be a better option than suggesting people who have that equipment carry it back and forth, because that's option 2, is right. A simpler way to tackle this is to give that person the equipment that they need and suggest that they carry it back and forth, and maybe provide them with some sort of transportation bag, right? A rolling laptop bag of some kind that will accommodate it. The challenge is, I think here, and we don't know for sure because we haven't really seen this a whole lot yet, but I think the challenge will be here is that this equipment isn't really designed to be ported around, right? When we talk about a specialty keyboard tray that maybe is, let's say, one that's tented or folded, it's more likely to get gunk underneath their keys, more likely to break in some area. It's not necessarily the best option, potentially from a durability perspective. We may damage this equipment more frequently by carrying it around. So I think we have to sort of weigh and maybe even try out a couple different options. Maybe it depends on how many staff you're talking and how much accommodated equipment you have. But it is interesting to think about, or I think we need to be thinking about those folks who have accommodations and how we fit those into our hoteling workstations. Hopefully, if it's like they need a great chair, well, we're going to provide great chairs. So hopefully they don't need to port a chair around. Hopefully that's not where we're at. But when we get to some of the smaller stuff like keyboards and mice, there may be different ways of tackling that as well. All right, so just things to consider. I think there's also been a lot of chat about psychological health and safety in the workplace, and I'd be remiss in not bringing that into our conversation about hoteling workstations as well today. They are not necessarily the best choices for everyone, and specifically folks who have some cognitive limitations or cognitive challenges, they may experience difficulty working in these spaces, depending on how they are designed, right? So the one I most recently was in, there's 30 desks in a large room. There are sort of partitions between, but it is a sort of an open space, right? A cubicle-based space, and there are a lot of folks in this area. Also surrounding the cubicle space are some co-working spaces. So there is sort of a space for people to sit and work together on a project that is out in the open and sort of surrounding these cubicle environments. So what I think that leads to sometimes is some challenges for a higher level of distractions. The environment can potentially be louder, maybe more interruptions, people walking by your desk that perhaps you wouldn't have experienced when you had a private working space, maybe when there was only 2 or 3 of you in a smaller office environment, certainly something different than most people experience in their home office environments. So we need to acknowledge that this isn't necessarily the best options for everyone, and that some people may struggle with some of these pieces. And I didn't mention it on my previous slide, but that might be even one of the pieces of equipment that you make available, right? Maybe somebody needs some sort of noise canceling headphones. So now this is an accommodation, not necessarily for physical restrictions, but perhaps a cognitive restriction. They need to really drown out those distractions. And so maybe noise canceling headphones become one of the tools in your toolbox that is available for booking out to try, and maybe that helps some of these cognitive limitations someone may have. We also potentially can think about how we design these spaces. So I've been talking a lot about individual workstation setup, but the design of the space overall can also help manage some of these, right? So perhaps what we have is different spaces available, right? We have, instead of co-working areas, right, more open spaces, something like this, right, in the middle of the room, they have co-working spaces. Perhaps we have also, hopefully we also have meeting rooms that are bookable with closable doors for various reasons. Confidentiality purposes sometimes is a key component, but also maybe we don't offer co-working spaces that are open to everyone. Maybe we say, you know what, that's not going to work for some of our employees who are using these spaces because that increases the noise level and distractions. So if you need a space like that, there are 3 closed rooms. You can go ahead and use any of those. They're available for booking, or maybe they're more like hot desking. You can drop in and use those if it's open, because it's sort of a organic, right? We've started a conversation. This needs to move somewhere so that it stays more separate and doesn't interrupt others. You can hop into one of these rooms that's sort of a co-working area. So those might be things to think about in the overall design of the space, not necessarily individual workstations, but how do we tackle that in a grander way? And then the other thing that we have seen a couple times, although this is still a little bit new, is some interesting throwback area. I feel like it's Throwback Thursday today, right? I have seen some telephone booths, right? We haven't, probably some of our staff have never been in a telephone booth before if they're a little younger, but we have seen some telephone booths come back, not with a phone physically attached to the wall, but the idea that this is a small space. Maybe there's a little semi-sitting stool. Maybe there's a little half desk in there, a little sort of space to drop some notes. But it's a place to go to close the door. It's sort of soundproof to the outside so people can't hear in, but you can have a phone conversation so that your phone rings. You can step into one of the phone booths so that you can have that conversation without limiting other people. I've also seen or heard about some places that are like, okay, one of the areas, you can book a workspace, you can book a small workstation, you can book a standard workstation, you can book a tall workstation, but you can also maybe book a workstation in a quiet area, almost like at a library, right? You have like your sort of more open areas, but I know when I went to school, there would be like reading rooms, right? Where those spaces were meant for folks who needed that quiet to be able to focus. Some clients are chatting about, okay, can we create a smaller hoteling area that is dedicated to people who need that quiet space, right? So there will be no meetings in here. You're not to answer your phone. Phones are to be on silent. We're not having online meetings in this space, right? This is meant for computer-based work that doesn't require that extra conversation going on, to really limit the noise that's happening in those spaces. So those would be also considerations, again, leading towards that sort of managing some of the psychological health and safety in the workplace to make these hoteling stations work for as many people as possible, right? We want people to have success here, not start struggling because they're distracted and getting nothing accomplished. All right, and last thing I said I wanted to chat about today was just training. I just want to give this sort of a very sort of slim chat. We know that people aren't successful at achieving good ergonomic setup without some kind of training and education. From us, specifically from Pro Ergonomics, when we started doing webinars about at-home setup, we were asking staff questions in the webinars about how they were set up. And what we learned is that 50% or more, depending on which feature we were asking about, were not achieving ideal ergonomic setup at home. So their monitor wasn't at the right height, their desk wasn't at the right height. They weren't receiving that education about how to set it up, and so therefore weren't being successful. Now, the good news is that if your equipment is really adjustable, then we should be able to achieve success here, but we won't likely get there without educating staff on what success looks like. So what do we actually want to achieve in terms of our setup? So I would say there's a couple different ways to tackle this. Number one, I would say first and foremost, access your existing resources. There are online tools available to you. Like if you select a standard chair, you're going to use it every one of your hoteling workstations. Very likely there is a video from that chair manufacturer that will teach your staff what all the adjustments do. Right? So that's part one. What do all these adjustments do on my chair? How do I use them? What am I looking for? So there are likely existing resources that you can share. And you'd have to get creative on how you get this out there, right? So when they sit at the workstation, they log in, does a screen pop up and say, do you want to take a training session, or do you want to watch the video on how to adjust your chair? Yes, no. I would assume the first few times that they sit down, the answer might be yes, but as they get better at this over time, perhaps the answer becomes no, and that's fine, right? But giving them that education on how to adjust their chair is a great example of an existing resource that's available that they might be able to use. You could also go or look at some custom education. So one of the things we're doing right now with a client that is kind of is actually a super fun project I'm really enjoying being part of, is taking this to the next level and saying, okay, we're going to do some custom education. We have this new shared workstation. We want to take people through how to properly adjust this. So we take them through how to find the right working height, how to adjust their chair height. They can also achieve that by raising or lowering the sit-stand desk. These are all sort of factors, and we're highlighting the equipment that they have at their workstation, and we're sort of doing it all in one. So rather than giving them a chair resource and a desk resource and a monitor arm resource, we're putting all those and combining them into one sort of brief education session so that they can go through the steps on how to properly set up these new hoteling workstations in order to achieve ideal ergonomic setup. So that training piece, I think, can't be understated because we're giving them some new equipment, some fabulous stuff, but if we're not teaching them how to use it, then we're not likely to be fully addressing our ergonomic concerns. We're going to have discomforts, we're going to have issues because people set things up very strangely. I promise you that. I've seen it over and over and over again, especially at home offices over the last few years. People make some very strange choices, and so that can be something that's important to achieve here as well. I have about 5 minutes left today, so I want to open the floor to questions. If anybody has anything that maybe a question about an existing hoteling workstation they're trying to get set up, maybe they're a question about a future one they're considering. I'm open to all kinds of questions. As you type, I should actually mention I didn't talk about webcams today, but I think that's probably also I'm not going to say it's essential. It depends on the type of work you do, but if online meetings are here to stay, then if you're going to have someone drop into a workstation, ideally it has a keyboard, mouse, monitor, and even a webcam attached to that monitor so that they can put the laptop on the desk and kind of ignore it, right? They don't need to use the laptop at all because they don't need to look at it even for their web-based meeting. It's going to be on their webcam. Their webcam's going to be mounted above their screen. So that helps even with ergonomic setup of those stations as well. And I would say that's probably like a Cadillac of workstations. It's sort of got all the pieces included. Awesome. I don't see any questions coming in, but it doesn't mean that you don't have any. I will sit around for the next couple minutes to answer anything that does pop up. If you have a more private question or more personal question that you'd like to share with me, then feel free to shoot that to my email. You can send it to info@proergonomics.ca, which I'll put in the chat right now. And that email goes directly to my inbox, so I will see it and be able to respond. But we're happy to field any questions as you start down this path. And if you want to have us do an assessment or help with delivering some kind of training or creating some kind of training, we're very happy to help you with that as well. It's definitely where I think the next year or two will look like as people start to work through how do these hybrid workstations or hoteling workstations look at our workplace. Thank you again for joining me today. I hope you took away some valuable information. I am here for questions if you have it, but if you're running to another meeting, I absolutely understand. Email will be out this afternoon with a link to the video for those of you that hopped in a little bit late today. It will be online and accessible. Thanks, everyone. I hope you have a great afternoon.